All right, so still have like 30 seconds before the official 5 past. Well, it depends on. I think we're good now. All right, so just to kind of, before I start, just to want to let you know that one, the reading list is updated, at least until reading week. I'm still working on the rest of it, but everything until reading week is updated and should be fine. If something is wrong or you can't see it for some reason, please do email me. The second question is that your first problem set is online. It's on Moodle. So we have seminars on Wednesday morning, right, between 9 and 1, depends on which seminar you were allocated. There are, I think, 3 questions, quite long ones. Please try to solve it yourself. If you can, all work in groups. We're going to solve it together during the seminar, but it's going to be very good for your learning and therefore your grade in this course if you're going to try to do it yourself. And then even if you don't manage to do everything, you don't manage to do some, or completely like, I have no idea what's going on here, we're going to do that, but at least attempt. I think that's going to be a reasonable strategy to do that. Right? So that's 3 questions overall. Admittedly, they are a bit long, but hopefully it's not going to be too bad. All right, so I always going to start lectures by reminding you what we did last week, because I know you have a busy schedule. And then I'm going to tell you what we are doing, what we're going to do this week as well. So last week it was more of an introduction and kind of a course overview, but we did mention a few things that I think are kind of an importance. I kind of wrote a few things that I need to remind you. So we talked about efficiency, the condition for efficiency. We talked about efficiency in 2 contexts, if you remember, production efficiency and exchange efficiency. And we said that when we have both of these together, we have what we call allocative efficiency, which is what we are trying to get, really. So in other words, we kind of have the right balance between consumption and environmental protection in the cheapest way possible. And we talked about the difference between an effective and efficient policy, if I remember. So we care also about the cost, not just about, let's say, reduce pollution in London from X to Y, right? So we also want to do that, the reduction in pollution in the cheapest way possible. And then we kind of said, look, whether a system of competitive market achieve efficiency, and we say yes, at least in theory, but that kind of depends on some very strong assumption that I kind of, in one of the slides I mentioned. And we also said that sometimes this assumption don't really hold in reality, and this is what we see quite often. And then when we have that, there is kind of a rationale for government intervention because there is a market failure, right? Remember, we talked about all of that. Again, it's things that I suspect you already did in your undergraduate degree, but just to kind of, making sure that everyone on the same page. And then, so we talked about market failure, but if you remember, we also talked about government failure. Remember, we mentioned 2 types. One, when the government failure of type 1, when government failed to intervene when they can potentially promote some kind of benefits, some improvement. And the second, which I think is the most interesting one, is government failure of type 2, or the Cobra effect. Remember I told you the story about cobras in India? So basically when government intervene and make things worse, the unintended consequence of government intervention, and we talk about both of these things, okay? Today we're going to start to kind of, studying environmental economic more seriously, because before it was pretty much just welfare stuff, thing that you covered, I suspect, before. Today we're going to talk about the differences between environmental goods, which are, between conventional goods that are allocated efficiently by the market and environmental commodities that we tend to, or markets fail to allocate efficiently. And we're going to talk about what are kind of the characteristics of environmental goods and bads that lead to this situation of either over provision of public beds or under provision of public goods. All right, we're going to talk about that. And then we will also look at what changes can be made to the market in order to solve this market failure. And that's something that we're going to do in the next few weeks. We're going to take our first step today. by doing something extremely simple. It's going to become more complicated as we go along. But in the next couple of weeks, I guess, or even more, we're going to spend time about thinking about policy tools that we can use in order to correct the market failure. Okay? But this is what we're going to do today. The first step is just thinking about what we can do. So basically what I mentioned before is kind of what make these differences between conventional goods and beds. Conventional goods and environmental commodities, which is basically a discussion about public goods and bads and externalities. And then the first approach that we're going to take today in order to correct this market failure is thinking about assigning property rights. Okay, because we said, if you remember last week, one of the conditions for the market to operate and allocate resources efficiently is defined property rights. So maybe, and we said this is kind of the biggest problem, so maybe if you can just assign property rights, maybe you can solve the whole issue, right? So we're going to talk about that and the complexities around doing that, okay? In reality, and also theoretically as well, all right? So that's what we're going to do today. Hopefully we can go through everything. So let's start by discussing the differences between conventional goods and environmental goods. So the fundamental characteristics of goods are excludability and rivalry. So let me kind of remind you what they are. So a good or a bad is excludable if it's feasible and practical to selectively allow consumer to consume it. Okay? And this is kind of a must, the excludability feature for prices to actually work. Right? Because, for example, let's take like a really simple example. Let's say I want to make chocolate and sell it. If I can't exclude you from consuming it, right, it's just I can't put a price on it because you can just consume it without paying me, right? So we have to have this feature here. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay, so it must be possible to exclude consumer from a good for prices to work. Otherwise, no one going to pay for it. They're just going to consume it. So this is kind of the first characteristic that is kind of an important thing to have. And you can think about it straight away in terms of, let's say, pollution or ambient pollution to be more concrete. I mean, if this is a bad rather, but can we exclude someone from enjoying the pollution in London? I don't know. We can talk about it later on. Okay, with indoor air pollution is slightly different. With ambient pollution, I think there is something about excludability here that kind of makes sense. The second thing is rivalry. So a bad or a good is rival if one person's consumption of a unit of it diminishes the amount of the good available for others to consume. Okay, so going back to the very silly example of me making chocolate, which you definitely don't want to try the chocolate if I ever make one. But let's say that we have that. If you, let's say I made one bar of chocolate. If you eat a bar of chocolate, it means that you don't have the bar of chocolate to eat. In terms of pollution, think about me enjoying the pollution in London. If I inhale the pollution, it doesn't really reduce the pollution available for you guys. All right, so you can already see that there are some differences potentially between conventional goods and environmental commodities, okay? All right, so this is the first thing that I wanted to mention. The other thing is private versus public good. So a good or a bad that is both rival and excludable is what we call a private good. All right, so we use this definition that I just made in order to classify goods and bads into different type of good. So again, if it's rival and excludable, right, I can exclude you, and the consumption of the good affect other consumer from consuming it, that means that this is just a private good. This is the goods that you were talking about, being taught during your undergraduate, I guess most of the time. It's just a simple good, the chocolate bar, the books, the whatever, right? The burgers that you want to consume, all of this kind of stuff. Then a good or a bad that is both non-rival and non-excludable is what we call a public good or a bad. All right? So public bad, things that we care about a lot, things like greenhouse gases, noise pollution, and things like that. All right? So that's the thing that we're going to talk about a lot. And in terms of public goods, you can think about national defense, army, and things like that. All right. Again, we can just use excludability and rivalry definition and kind of make it, as in here and here. This is for bad, this is for good, for example. How we classify different goods, bads, and commodities into different point. And this is kind of what I mentioned here. This is about indoor air pollution. So in this case in here, it's something that is non-rival but excludable. So this is why I was very careful when I say ambient air pollution, which is arguably non-excludable and non-rival. Okay? Because I can exclude someone from coming into the room, for example. Okay? So we need to be very, very careful with this stuff. So indoor air pollution is very, very different from ambient air pollution outside. For many, many reasons. We're going to come back to that in week 11. Actually, do we even need to worry about indoor air pollution? I'm going to show you a lot of work around that. Well, not a lot of work, a lot of my work on that. There is very little work on that, actually. It's really understudied. But, we're going to think about going back to week, 2 or 3, thinking about, should we even worry about it as an economist? So remember this point here. Okay, everything here is connected. That might look super obvious to you. I'm reminding you some of this stuff. We're going to revisit all of this stuff later on when we think about estimates, when we think about all of this stuff. All right, so we have that. We also have, what else we might care about? Something that is rival and non-excludable. So we call that a common resource. I guess you care about some of this stuff. So think about fish stock in international water. Okay, anyway, the point is that we can try to use these two definition here to categorize different goods and bads. Okay. What's the issue here? And we're going to talk about it today a bit more. The issue here is that public goods and bads are not provided optimally by the market because non-excludability make it impossible to charge for them, as I just mentioned before with the chocolate example, and non-rivalness make it undesirable to charge for them. And we're going to talk about it and give you some examples for that today. Yes. Yeah. So we think about, so this is kind of actually, we're talking about bads here, not good, right? And we think about the CO2 as how much you emit. I mean, the fact that I can't really exclude you from my emission, right? So it affects everyone.
I mean more the rivalry.
Okay, so if I kind of, so what do you have in mind? So if I consume the CO2, what do you have in mind?
Well, sort of like the way I understood, for instance, the grazing land is that we have a certain amount that we can use up, and then if someone else is using it, then this other person cannot use it. Do I understand that correctly?
The non-rivalry.
The rivalry, because we have the good of grazing land in there. The rival non-excludable.
Sorry, where are we now? Sorry, I'm not with you.
I'm rambling a bit, I'm sorry. Grazing land, okay, so
Yeah.
top right corner.
Yeah.
And I would say, for instance, I would put clean air in the same bucket. Or would that be incorrect? Because I'm a bit confused because like the equivalent of turning it around would then be non-rival.
But if I consume good air, because you switch air pollution with good air quality.
Yes.
But if I consume good air quality, how is that rival? So I'm not affecting your ability to consume the same air.
Because you're saying if there's only one amount of carbon that you can use, that everyone can use, if there's one defined amount, then it becomes rival that one country is using.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but everyone can do whatever they want. So this kind of like what I'm saying is that, you're thinking about under policy. Or is that what you have in mind?
Like under sustainability considerations.
Okay, so two things. First of all, so just 2 points, and we can talk about it,
Yeah.
I think maybe one-on-one, but and I'm going to take some other question. But two things. First of all, I don't want to to use interchangeably, air pollution and CO2 emission, because these are two different but related environmental issues. The second thing that I want to say, if you think about air quality, I think that it's fair to say that this is a non-rival, the air quality. But in terms of CO2 emission, I think it is as a bad. And then I think that, my ability to, so if I, emit more, it doesn't have any impact on your level of emission, I would say, because you can do whatever you want at the moment. Okay? If we are in a situation and we have like a budget on how much we can all do that, that's totally, but this is only when we intervene in the market, right? If we just leave it as it is. And that's the main point that we're going to try to solve. So you're kind of ahead of that, but we are not there yet. Okay? Yes. No, but
I think if I understood it correctly, he looks at the capacity of Earth to absorb a certain amount of CO2 without a problem as a public good, and that is rival.
so you're saying that in some point we just have too much CO2 and the Earth is not going to be able to sustain that.
Right, so if you want to stay below, let's say, 1.5 degrees.
But that's my point. We don't have to actually do that, and it doesn't look like we are on the path to do that. But if you think about a piece of land, all right, let's just go that. This is finite, and there is, once you took it, that's it. With the atmosphere, I understand the confusion, but it's not quite the same thing as long as we don't put some boundaries around it. For example, what you just said in your comment, which we want to keep within, let's say, 1.5 degree or something like that. But for that, in order to do that, we need to kind of put some restriction, which we currently don't have. With the land, we already have physical restriction on that. So you're saying that there is physical restriction on the capacity of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's kind of, maybe it's, we can talk about it sometime else, but I just don't see it as exactly the same thing. You had a comment at the back as well? But we're not capping anything right now. Wait, we're going to cap in 2 weeks, all right? So wait with a cap, all right? We're just not there. Everyone admit. By the way, when you think about climate change, some countries, we might going to see some, and I'm going to show some pretty good evidence. Maybe some argue that some would benefit from that. Some countries, some industries, some regions, right? So it's not just, everyone has the same kind of, this is part of the problem, by the way. All right? Yes. We're going to talk about it today. It's related, but it's not exactly the same thing, but it's related. I would argue that actually the public bad is a better use of things in economics, because I think this is how because this is really the fundamental, like the rivalry, non-rivalry, and excludability, non-excludability, how we kind of think about stuff in econ. And I think that externality is just easier to explain to other people what's going on. But anyway, we can choose. You can use it. It's very similar. I'm going to go back to that point later. Yes.
So are we looking at one point in time? Because maybe I'm getting into the weeds, but if I consume O2 and then release CO2, and like there's photosynthesis that gets more O2 back into the atmosphere later on after that.
Okay, we're going to talk about dynamic issues. So let's keep everything. But let's keep everything simple. Let's think about everything statically right now, and we're going to relax again some of this assumption as we go along the course. All right. So great comments. I was thinking you're going somewhere about carbon capture, and I was like, oh man, I haven't thought about that for a bit. Which I'm glad you didn't, because I don't have a good answer for that. Because it just came to me. I need to think about it. Maybe by Wednesday I will come with an answer. But regarding your original question, I think that you're just like 2 weeks ahead of time. We just like, let's just keep it simple for now. All right. So this is kind of what I want to say. Let's kind of try to determine how much of a public good should be provided. Seems simple, right? So let's kind of try to do that. So consider two agents. Marginal willingness to pay for a rival good. Again, this is something very, very simple, right? How do we produce the aggregate demand curve? This is something that you've probably done before, simple micro stuff. So we have two friends, MJ and MG, right? Each one of them has individual demand curve. If we want to create an aggregate demand curve with just some individual demand at every price level, this is horizontal summation, right, of these two curves. So again, this is MJ demand curve, this is MG demand curve, and we can just sum across individual at each price, and we get this aggregate demand curve. Right? This is what you did in micro first year undergraduate, I suppose. Okay, so this is kind of the way that we create an aggregate demand curve for bread or whatever rival good that you have in mind. Okay, so this is kind of very, very simple, something that you've done before. What you might not done before is what about a non-rival good? So the same kind of example, MJ and MG, but now it's a non-rival good. Okay, so how is that going to work? So in order to do that, instead of doing this horizontal summation, what we're going to do, we basically going to do a vertical summation. Why is that? Because all the consumer that we have will consume the entire amount that is being produced. Think about national defense, okay? We all going to consume the national defense that we have, right? This is kind of a public good. So the the aggregate demand curve is going to look very different, right? This is how it's going to look like, right? We're just going to add them both together. So instead, if you remember before, it started with 5, right? Here. Now it's going to start with 8. And then it's just going to be basically sum across the whole thing, okay? So this is how it's going to look. So it looks like a small distinction, but it's quite an important one, okay? Because what we're interested here is the total willingness to pay of these two agents, okay? Again, the difference here is they all consume it, the whole thing, okay? They consume the same amount. So think about defense, as I mentioned, or let's say, let me think about an example, right? We want to contribute to a common room, okay? We want a common room in our department. We have one, but let's say we don't have one, okay? My willingness to pay here is 5 franc Venmans. The lecturer is going to teach you from week 1 to week 5. In the next term, his willingness to pay is 3. In this case, if it's a non-rival, right? So basically what we here, what our total willingness to pay is going to be 8. Okay, this is how we need to think about it, because we can both use it. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. Or we can consume the services of that together. All right, so this is kind of what I want to show you. Then, so we create this kind of we can put these two demand curves together, right? So one for the non-rival and one for the rival, and we can just put a supply curve as well, right? The marginal cost of supply, right? And what do we see from here? We see that we get very different level of provision, depends whether it's a rival or non-rival. Okay? And what is that kind of tell you, what we can see from here? Well, it's what I said before in words. It means that, if we have if we have a non-rival, right? Good, which is this guy in here, that the provision here, so if we, right, let me just change it as well. If the good is actually non-rival and treated as a rival, we're just going to have an under-provision of the public good. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so we're going to be here rather than where we're supposed to be here. Okay, so this is what happened if we just mistreat it. So what I just show you, I show you that public goods and bads differ from private goods and bads. I explained to you why, the extradability and the rivalry concept. This is what kind of make them so different, and why private market might fail in this context. Again, because if we're going to treat, we're going to do more of that in the problem set, but the point is that if we treat that good or bad as a rival when it's actually non-rival, we're just going to, for example, if it's a good, we're going to under-provide that. We're going to be here rather than here. That's my point. This is why you have under-provision of public goods. Right? It's just easier to show it with goods, but we're going to talk about it in terms of bads later. It's just kind of more intuitive. Yeah?
That means in some cases, depending on the supply, there's more expensive
In here, yeah, I mean, look, okay, so this is kind of a note, that's a good point. So basically a note about all the figures that I'm gonna show you from now until week 7, I think. I made them very simple and kind of everything fits exactly how I want that to happen and what I wanna show you. But actually the second part of this term is to try to estimate all this stuff empirically with econometrics. So we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about, I'm going to talk about marginal damage, I'm going to talk about all of that. Basically, most of my research is to try to estimate the marginal damage and the marginal abatement cost of air pollution. So I'm going to show you how we actually do that, but this is kind of just to show you the theory and stuff. So some of the things that it's definitely not going to look like that in reality, okay? But I mean, some of the stuff I'm going to show you, mainly around air pollution, is not that far off, but it's definitely not going to be exact. It's just to kind of show you the intuition rather than anything else, all right? And when we come to the estimation on how you actually empirically estimate, for example, marginal damage or marginal abatement costs and all this stuff, I'm going to go back to the slides that I used in the first couple of weeks to show you, how it's all related, right? But good point. Okay, so show how public goods and beds differ from private goods and beds and examine how much of a public good is desirable. What happens if we leave it to the market? Again, let's take an example and see what's going on. Two people need to decide whether they want to invest in a machine that cleans the air. Sorry, lots of examples going to be around air pollution because it's what I'm working on. X is the expenditure on private goods, okay? G is expenditure on public goods. In this case, or public good, in this case is the clean air machine, air purifier. W is the total wealth that we have, and budget constraint is given by the following expression here. So we have two individual 1 and individual 2, right? So this is the wealth of individual 1, and they can spend their money on either X, expenditure on private goods, or the public goods, and the same goes for W2. And just for simplicity, we're just going to put an equal sign here. We don't have to do that. In fact, in the problem set, I'm just going to make your life slightly more complicated when I'm not going to do exact equality. And let's see how that goes. C is the cost of the machine, the air purifier in this case. And the machine gets purchased if G1 plus G2 is equal or greater than C, right? So if the expenditure of the individuals, person 1 and person 2, to combine is either greater or equal to the cost of the machine. We can also create this individual utility function that are given by the following two expressions. So U1 is the utility that individual 1 get from certain consumption, X1, and capital G. Okay, so capital G is basically the public good. So it will be, it's going to be a binary variable here. So it's going to be whether 0, 1. So if it's being purchased, yes or no. So the utility of individual 1 depends whether we buy the machine, yes or no, if G equal 1 or 0, and also the consumption of individual 1. And the same thing goes for person 2 with exactly the same logic. Okay, so it depends on their consumption and whether the air purifier has been purchased or not. The marginal rate of substitution, if you remember that, the slope of the indifference curve, remember that along the curve? This is the marginal rate of substitution. I'm going to talk more about it in the seminar because we're going to calculate some of this stuff together. But the marginal rate of substitution between the private good and the public good is the reservation price, and it's given by R1 and R2. And we can define R1 and R2 in the following way, okay? So we can define R1 like that. So R1 satisfies the following expression here. WI, so the wealth of individual I, whether it's 1 or 2, minus the reservation price for the same individual, right? So this is what's going on here. And this is 1 when G equal 1. So this is when they purchase the public good, the air purifier, is equal to the utility of the same individual if they don't purchase the air purifier and they have all the wealth. So they don't have minus, they don't have R here, okay? So basically the R's here is the maximum willingness to pay to purchase the public good. It's what make the utility equivalent is what makes the individual indifferent between buying or not buying. All right? This is what R actually means here, right? That's the reservation price. That's what it means. And there are two possible allocations here. One is W1, W2, and 0. So this is when we don't purchase the public good, the air purifiers. And the other one is X1, X2, and 1. This is when we do purchase the public good. X here is just going to be equal to Wi minus Gi, lowercase g, because G is what individual I, Gi is what individual I contributed towards the public good, towards the capital G. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, fine. If not, just go again for it with a cup of tea or something later on today or tomorrow, all right? But it does make sense. All right, so what will be the Pareto improvement to, when it will be a Pareto improvement to provide clean air? So let's think about that. The provision of the clean air machine will be Pareto improvement if for each individual I, we get the following expression, right? So the utility for individual I when we purchase the air purifier is greater than the utility that they get if we don't purchase the air purifier. Okay? Now we can use the definition that we used before for reservation price and budget constraint, what we had in the slide before. So basically this guy is here and this guy here, to rewrite this expression here. Okay, so I'm just gonna take this expression here. I don't know if you can see that. Can you just hold on for like 2 minutes? Yeah. I take this expression here, okay? Do you want to say something about equality? That's what you have in mind?
No, just one thing I wanted to make sure I got.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the first part, the first W there is a W because all of its wealth is going into the private good. So it's the same.
Yeah, it's essentially they don't. Yeah. Yeah, you can write. We can rewrite it, which is exactly what we're going to do now. Okay, but okay, so we can take this, okay, this expression here, and put it here in the middle. This is exactly what I just did. Okay, and we can. Well, we're not going down exactly the same logic as what you had in mind, but we can rewrite that in different ways. But one way that we can rewrite it. So again, what you see here is exactly the same expression as what you see here in the middle. And I can rewrite this thing in here as this thing in here, right? Because this is what we already mentioned before, right? I'll just show you that. This is essentially this guy here. Okay, this is essentially the definition for R. So we can use that. And then instead of writing this, right, instead of writing xi, we can just write wi minus gi. Again, we already mentioned it before. This is this guy here. Okay? So now you can just ignore the thing in the middle and you stay with this guy in here and this guy in here, and you can rewrite it as that expression here, and then move to this expression here. So what is that actually? What I just show you now, I just show you that each person contribution is less than their actual willingness to pay. Okay? It's a bit of math here. It's nothing complicated, but it's basically what I show you. And these are the necessary conditions that G must satisfy for the purchase of the machine. Okay? Now, let's talk about, so this is necessary condition. Let's speak about sufficient condition for the purchase of the machine. So what do we need? We need that R1 plus R2 going to be strictly greater than G1 plus G2, okay? Which is actually need to be equal to C. Right? Because this is the individual contribution towards the public good. That should be equal to the cost of the public good. Just give me 1 second. Okay? And R1 and R2, we just kind of show, right, need to be bigger than that. Okay? This is basically what I just showed. Yes? What, in here?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just because I just show you that it's strictly here. So where would you change it that it's not going to be strictly? You're saying if it's here, if it's going to be greater or equal here?
Then at that point, the equalness there would just be different.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Okay. Where am I? Okay, So if dissatisfied, if we have the sufficient condition, there always exists a payment scheme such that both people will be better off with the public goods. And then if this condition is satisfied, then if we don't purchase the public good, right, the air purifier, it means that this is not a Pareto efficient allocation. What does that actually mean? It means that whether we buy it or not depends on R1 and R2, and that really much depends on wealth distribution, no matter how much we actually, what's R1 and R2. So in some cases, we're going to have R1 and R2 that are greater than C, and therefore we're going to purchase. In some cases, it's going to be less than that, all right? But this is how it's going to work. But it's kind of more complicated than that. Why this is the case, because let me kind of give you an example. A very, very simple game theory example, and maybe that's going to explain something. When we're going to do game theory more seriously in the second term, well, not with me, with someone else, it's going to be complicated. This is just like super, so just enjoy that for now. So let's suppose that, because so far we actually ignore the determination of actual individual payment. Let's kind of think about that a bit. So let's suppose that we have two individuals, and let's say that they have wealth. Each one of them has a wealth of 500 pounds, and they want to buy. I don't know. They live on the same street, and they want like a new street light or something like that. All right. RI is the maximum willingness to pay to purchase the public good, and C is the cost of the public good. So let's say to install the street light is going to cost 150. Okay, so you can see straight away that each one of them has an R of 100, right? So together, right, they're willing to pay 200, and the cost is 150. Right? So it seems like, okay, something might work here, right? Because we have enough in our budget, so to speak. So since R1 and R2 is greater than C, it seems like it's a Pareto efficient to buy, okay? So let's kind of model that in a very, very simple and unrealistic game theory game, okay? Again, I know, don't come after me. It's like, oh no, we can change the rules. Just let me make the point. One, let's assume that exclusion is impossible. So if we put it there, the street light, everyone on the street, which is two individuals, can enjoy it. And then the second, which is more controversial, I guess, we can relax that later, each make the purchasing decision independently. So now that I have all this information, I can just put it all in a matrix and kind of solve that as we do looking for a Nash equilibrium, kind of, dominant and strategy. What's happened here? So we have two people here, person one and person two. You remember how it works. So person one make a decision whether they want to buy it or don't buy it. Person two also make a decision at the same time whether they want to buy it or don't buy it. And inside here in the matrix, in each cell here, you have the different payoffs out of these two conditions. For example, if they both decide to buy it, so both of them buy, they just overbought essentially, and each payoff for each individual going to be minus 50 because both of them bought. It's going to cost 150 for each person. Right, their R is equal to 100, so it's minus 50. If person one decide to buy and person two decide not to buy, so the person one going to get a payoff of minus 50, and person two will get a payoff of 100 because this is the willingness to pay for that, and they don't pay anything. And here, person one don't buy, person two buy, so person one get a payoff of 100, and person 50, and then if they both don't buy it, just pay off of 0. What's going to be a dominant strategy here? It's quite clear you can do that yourself, but it's just not to buy, right? So it's always in your best interest not to buy. And what we're going to end up in, we're going to end up in a situation when we don't buy, even though I just showed you before that it kind of makes sense to buy it in this case, okay? But of course, this depends on the rules of the game and what we do. We don't allow for transfer, we don't allow for all of these things, we make decisions independently and all this kind of different stuff. But it's just to make the point that sometimes we have an incentive not to contribute to public good, especially when we have lots of people involved, because we want a free ride. We want someone else to do the contribution instead of us. We want someone else to reduce their emission of CO2. not our country, another country, because they are the bad people, right? We don't want to do that, right? We want other people. If I emit a bit of pollution, that's not going to affect London as a whole, right? So maybe someone else should reduce their pollution. Maybe someone else needs to buy an electric car, not me, all right? All of these kind of different things that we do. So whether that in terms of goods and provision of public goods, or in terms of beds and how much we actually contribute to the problem. Yes? Yeah, of course. If it's only by, if it's, of course it's not, because your willingness to pay is less than the cost. Because if it's together, if let's say that we can just pay 75 each, then it's 150. Our maximum needs to pay is 100, so we still both get some benefit, you would think, right?
Well, then why in this case both buying the full price themselves?
Because we just about, that's what I mentioned before, this is just depends on the rules of the game, and basically the decision here is just to make the point that it's not always necessary. But this is basically what I'm saying here, right? So if you can compensate and you can give people some compensation, that might change the game quite a bit. Okay, so let me just see what the time is, because I want to take a break soon, but not just yet. So private purchasing decision with respect to public goods might not lead to efficient outcome. Optimal provision of the non-rival good is difficult to obtain because we don't know people valuation. People have incentive to lie. Okay, specifically, let's go back to the example. If I have a neighbor, which I do, let's say that, all right, let's make this kind of unrealistic story of a house in London with a few neighbors, and we have garbage bins outside, and we want to build some kind of nice storage unit for them that it's not going to be like all over the place in our front garden, so to speak. And then we said, okay, get some quotes, and then we asked people, how much are you willing to pay for that? One would argue that either me or some of my neighbors said, I don't really care, if you want, you can do it. Because they're also going to benefit from that, and they don't want to contribute. So they want to free ride me, because I kind of, I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm just saying that I came up with this proposition. They, might suspect that they kind of really want it, but have an incentive to lie, because they don't want to contribute towards this provision of this very, very simple, small, not really public goods, but kind of, if you know what I mean. Okay? So, and that's a real thing, by the way, especially in the context of housing, right? So if you think about renovation of a house, if you share it with other people, people say like, yeah, you can do it. I don't have the money. I don't want to do it. I don't care. Okay, and there are lots of legislations around that because of this thing. All right, it's very, very hard to deal with. Yeah, this kind of point 3. Right, punchline, markets underprovide public goods and overprovide public beds. I think it's kind of a good time to take a 10-minute break. So let's come back at 2 to 5. Is that okay? All right, thank you. Yeah.
So the fishing that we share is non-exclusive.
The what, sorry?
The fishing that we share you mentioned
Yeah.
are non-exclusive, right? Everyone can go.
If it's an international water and there is no jurisdiction, yeah, I would say that everyone can go there.
Well, the multinational goes and it sells the resources.
If what, sorry?
A multinational company
Yeah.
goes to the ocean, sells the resources, and it's right.
It's totally right. That's my point. It's not suitable, but it's totally right. Because if I take the fish out, you have the stock of fish depleted. So you have, which is the same with air. That was my point, because
You can it sells the pollution, right?
you can what?
It sells the air pollution.
So, oh, you mean kind of if I really
Yeah.
it's unlikely going to be the case. Yeah. So it's not that if there are more people around London, if they, it's not going to reduce the particle efficiency. Yeah.
Back to that point one more time, if I may. First,
you said that it's a difference because the land is depletable and it's fixed and limited, and well, so is the atmosphere. It's very large, I'll give you that, but it's also fixed, it's limited. No, but the point is, and
So we're going to have more and more concentration.
right, the reason why I bring this point up is because I was at this talk of Professor Dasgupta about natural capital.
Yeah.
And he said that you can look at the ability of Earth to absorb or to tolerate a certain level of CO2 as a good. Like you turn it around, it's not, you say CO2 emission is bad, but there's a good in we can emit that much. Exactly. He turns that one around.
Yeah.
And that, I would say, is rival because that is definitely a limited, finite good that Earth can only tolerate so and so much pollution. Or, sorry, of course not pollution, but so and so much CO2 emissions.
And then there are consequences to that.
Right.
But it's not that it can't tolerate, it can have that.
Sure, but
Right.
there will be, in that sense, I see that the...
But that's the point. If I have a land, once
Right, but
I took it,
it's
that's
still
it.
it's still a boundary. It might be more abstract in that sense, but it does exist. It's not in that sense artificial.
So so let me ask you that. What is the point in which, I genuinely, it's a third question, and I'm not sure if I have the answer. This is why it's so beautiful. But I think that, so in what point, what's the limit?
Of how much CO2 we can emit? Not the point. Not just because we don't know doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No, but is there a limit?
Most would argue, yes.
So, in what stage we reach this limit? Is it one? Is we can ask you,
Right.
okay, from a theoretical and practical perspective, as you said.
Practical, I agree, absolutely.
So we are everything. But also, like, I'm not sure if there is. I mean, it might be that you say that I just don't know.
Right, but I mean,
this is why my question is like, okay, so you say that there is a fix, but explain to me why. Because what happens? Because we have more particles, right? Or we have more CO2. But is that something that at some point it just what happened that is we reached the limit? So what happened then? So we can't emit anymore? No, we can emit.
Yeah, exactly.
So what,
but
the
there
Earth
will
will, I'm gonna be super provocative.
Yeah.
Earth will explode.
Yeah, exactly. No, of course not. But
So then there is no limit.
that is also not entirely true.
Right. You think about limit because of the consequences.
Yes.
I'm thinking about limit because of
Yeah,
physical limit.
physical constraints. Yes.
So what is the physical constraint here? So I ask you, if there is a point in which we emit an additional unit of CO2 to the atmosphere, we can't do that.
Right. Of course. No. We will always be able to emit more CO2
So
into the atmosphere.
this is the philosophical distinction that the theoretical distinction between these two issues. Because there is a physical limit on how much land I have. And here, I mean, you think about consequences, you think about damages, you think about no one going to be able to live here, but this is not the same thing. These are similar, but in my view,
is it philosophically in that sense?
I think both. Practically, it's completely different.
Exactly. That's the
And also philosophically, because of what I just said. This is my view. I mean, we can argue about it.
Definitely.
I'm not saying that I'm definitely. This is one of the things that look. This is why I love teaching at LSE because I've been challenged with like really good things that I've never thought about before. But this is kind of to me what would be. So if I would have been the same lecture as you went to, I would raise the hand and say like, what is the limit? I was like, you probably say, oh, I don't know the limit. Okay, but is there a point? Exactly what I told you, that we are physically cannot emit one more unit of CO2. So and maybe
probably
that's
yes.
true.
Yeah, that
But
also exists, but it's so absurdly high that we just don't have anything to emit anymore. I mean, you could argue that is also because there's a finite amount of resources on this planet. Like wasn't that part of the first degree in the spaceship Earth?
No. I mean, I agree.
So theoretically, there is a limit.
So there is no. So that's like a big debate about limit control.
Yeah, exactly.
And and there are different people that think differently. I think that there is almost no limit.
Right.
Because we can always innovate.
Yeah, I mean, that was
And
also
there is
what.
substitution.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, anyway, we can talk about it for,
But
hours, but this is kind of my
I agree
my
with
view
you
on stuff.
that was also.
So it's like
limits to go
Malthusian, and like this is kind of going back to this
Club of
point.
Rome and all these.
So but it's like we show that as human race, we like not me, but others are like phenomenal innovation, and that there is no limit. So the land was the limit in the whole production function.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of once A comes into the production or growth function, right? Then it's completely changed everything.
Right,
Because we can use the same. Anyway, the other question.
Please go.
But great discussion. Yeah.
Mine's not a question. It's more like I need to work on Wednesday, and unfortunately I can't make the seminar. And I just wanted to talk to you about an excused absence.
Just this Wednesday or in
Just this
general?
Wednesday,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So what's going to happen is we're going to do some problems, and then after that on Wednesday afternoon I'm going to put the solution. So try to kind of walk through it, and then maybe come to see me during my office hours the week after for things that you don't understand, and we can go through it.
All right,
Does
thank
that
you.
make sense?
Yeah. Do you need me to write you an email so it's in writing or anything like that?
No, just come to my office. I mean, just book office hours. If you want, email me, whatever you want.
Okay, I'm just for like the excused absence. It's okay if I just.
Actually, I do need to register that you told me that, so if you can write me an email, that's going to be fantastic.
I will do that. Thank you.
Yes.
Basically, always the operational
Yeah, this is because of the properties of the public goods or that we just discussed. Because just market will allocate resources inefficiently because of that. Because the market will treat it as a rival, let's say, but it's actually non-rival. So yeah, it's not going to be efficient. We can do better. That's my point. So if we and I'm going to show you some examples today about how we think about what is efficient. So I will show you that today in the context of market failure. Okay. No, when we talk about Pareto efficient, we mean about efficiency. But I'm gonna show you that today. Okay. Yes.
I just had a question about this point about person one giving person two money for
Yeah.
a purchase. So it says between 50 and 100, but why not till like 149? Because I tried doing that over here, and it would still be minus 49 and 99. So the dominant strategy becomes for one person 59 and then 49.
And then what's going to be the national equilibrium? So what's going to be the outcome of the game?
This one.
So, okay, send me an email. I'm going to look into that because I don't want to do it right now.
So
Yeah?
I just had a question.
No. Okay. don't deal with allocation. You can CC me. You emailed me to change the settings? Oh, you emailed me just today. Okay, I haven't seen it. So she might have replied, or she haven't replied, I don't know. Okay, I'll take a look. Okay, thank you. All right, so all right, so let's go back so again, punchline: market under provide public goods and over provide public bed. Now let's suppose that we can actually set prices for public goods and beds. Can we do this and obtain efficiency? So let's look at that. The answer is no. But let's think about a simple example. Let's say that we have a park with a fence around it, so it's non-rival and excludable. So we can exclude people around that. Let's also assume that congestion is not an issue. So for example, if you go to the park, it doesn't affect, again, maybe an unrealistic assumption, doesn't affect my ability to enjoy the park, etc. So if that's the case, the argument would be that we should allow everyone to enter the park, everyone that wants to do that, because we don't have any extra cost for doing that, right? There is no congestion prices in this case, right? It doesn't really affect. So what does that mean if we're thinking about this kind of diagram here? We say like, okay, Q, let's say what it used to be, that doesn't make any sense. We're better off going to Q star, because we can just, reduce the price and let more people to come in, right? At the end of the day, we want P equal MC, right? And the marginal cost of the other people, we just want to let it through. What we're going to end up with, we're going to have in the margin cost equal to 0, right? Because there is no additional cost for the individual that go into the park actually cost. So that's clearly not something that we can work with, because that it basically means that the price is going to be 0. Okay, so again, very, very simple point, but non-rival goods should have a marginal cost of equal to 0. What about a non-rival bed? I think this is kind of more interested. So let's consider the following example, okay? Noise pollution next to an airport. Okay, so people live next to an airport. Why do they want to do that? I don't know, ask them. But let's say they want to do it because I'm going to show you some paper in week 11 that's going to show you like why you don't want to do that. But for now, let's assume that, well, people make this decision because, let's say, it reduced their commuting time. Okay, I'm joking. There is a reason. It's actually a big issue. We're going to talk about it in a few weeks. Over several weeks, because when we talk about hedonic, we're also going to talk about that as well, because that's priced into the housing as well. Okay. So what's going on? This kind of related to this point. Without any compensation, what happened? People optimally make this trade-off between commuting time and noise pollution, right? So some people, for example, don't care about noise pollution at all. Okay. I know that my wife doesn't. She grew up. She was born and grew up in London. She cared. I mean, to be honest, where she was is quite quiet. But anyway, she really doesn't care about noise that much. Okay. I care about it a lot. Okay, but someone like her, for example, she doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter for her noise. She really cares about how long it takes her to get from home to work. So maybe when she does a trade-off, it's going to be very, very different than the way that I do this trade-off between these two things. Okay, but the point that and different individuals in society have different trade-offs that they make, different preferences, etc., etc., etc. The point is that as a society, we make these kind of trade-offs, and it creates an optimal allocation of residents across space. Okay? How we do this trade-off, we basically set the marginal commuting cost equal to the marginal noise damage. Okay, so yes, so there is some damage, but we kind of compare that to the commuting cost as well. The question is whether we can make a Pareto improvement payment here. Okay? Basically, paying people for the noise, for the damage that's being created. I would argue this is a terrible idea. Why? Basically, what you're going to do when you do that, you're going to distort this optimal allocation of residents across space, because you basically will provide incentive to people to go towards noise. This is horrible incentive to do for people. You can think about it in terms of air pollution as well. You're just going to drive people towards air pollution. Okay, that's something that you don't necessarily want to do. One, you're going to distort the equilibrium in the market, and and the efficient allocation of residents across space, as I mentioned before. But also, if you think about more, I guess, as in a moral way, I mean, you can try to think about what population tends to live in these areas, and it just basically maybe they are there because of a budget constraint, for example, and now you incentivize even more people with potentially less wealth to go towards these areas. Okay? And it doesn't have to be noise pollution in this example. You can think about other stuff as well. If you live next to a major road, yeah, you might going to be next to, you're going to be exposed to noise, but oftentimes this noise pollution also bundled with air pollution as well, and there is like some terrible cases that had significant, that show that this kind of proximity to busy roads has a significant impact on human life. Okay, and we're going to look at some of them together. So the point here is that you definitely don't want to do that, and the issue here is, I think it's kind of related to some of the points that we had before, is the non-rivalry aspect of that, because in terms of the efficiency argument, the efficient allocation of residents, because the fact that let's say, decide to leave next to the airport doesn't reduce the noise being created by the airport. I'm not consuming the noise, and therefore less noise is available for other people. By the way, when we think about this stuff, right, these kind of problems, we need to be very careful, because noise pollution can come from different sources, and the consequences, including what I just said, might change in terms of different settings. So for example, I can think about a situation, take away I deliberately use an airport as an example here, but think about a major road. If I decide, let's say that currently, I keep picking on you, I'm going to pick on you now. You live, so you kind of live relatively next to a major road. And let's say I decide to build a house just in front of you, between you and the road. In this situation, that might not going to be the case, because I might block some of probably the noise, and maybe some of the pollution as well. Okay, so small differences might matter here, right? With the airport, that's unlikely to be the case. But in this case, it might very well be the case. Okay, so again, you need to think about the non-rivalry. This is kind of the main issue. This is what's driving that. And in this case in here, the fact that I'm building the house in front of you actually has an impact. I am consuming some of the noise and prevent you from doing that, right? So it's kind of a very, very fine line here. So having discussed consumption, let's talk about production a bit. So price of zeros to consumer for non-rival good is optimal, but obviously producer cannot afford this. We can't just sell it for nothing. The alternative is that they will charge a positive price, and too little of the good will be provided. For non-rival bad, take smoke production by a steel plant, for example. So the producer wants to produce smoke until marginal profit are zero. Okay, so they want to emit as much smoke as they want, essentially, because the price of smoke is zero, so they don't need to pay for abatement, and producer runs the budget surplus, right? They don't need to pay for the emission that they actually created. Now, if we require compensation on a balanced budget, this, like a private provision of public goods, since people are compensated, they will desire more than is optimal, and there will be over-provision of the public bed. What do I mean by that? I mean, like, if I now, let's say there is a steel mill, and they, produce the steel by the byproduct, they have smoke as well and pollution. If now I require compensation, maybe some people will say, like, look, we want more, and actually we're going to reach a situation when we have, or they need to be compensated, depends on how you look at that. Maybe you're going to be in a situation where we have an over-provision of that. Last thing that I want to say before I move to externality is something about Lindell pricing. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It's one way to solve the problem of the provision of public goods. And it involved the following two steps. One, determine the intersection of aggregate supply and aggregate demand to find the efficient level of the public goods. So basically get the benchmark, what we actually want to achieve. And two, charge each consumer the willingness to pay for the amount of the public goods. And that will result in what we call a Lindell equilibrium. The limitations here are quite big, so it's kind of a nice thing to do theoretically, but it's impractical. Why? Because we need the individual demand curves, okay? This is something that is pretty much impossible to get in reality, okay? It's hard enough to get a demand function, an economy-wide demand function, let alone the demand function for each individual. This kind of thing gonna create a lot of problems for us in this term, but we're gonna try to do our best to deal with that, and sometimes I'm just gonna tell you that's the best we can do. We can't do more than that, but it's kind of one point that I wanna make here in this context, and the other one is that free rider problem still exists because people still have this kind of incentive to free ride, okay? So that's kind of, again, theoretically attractive, but impractical. Someone mentioned externalities before. I don't remember who it was, but someone. So that's kind of, it's a related concept, and this is kind of a definition. I'm going to show you what it is more specifically. I suspect that many of you have seen that before. But an externality exists when the consumption or production choice of one person or firm enter the utility or production function of another entity without that entity's permission for compensation. So you can think about steel mill as we just did now, and think about the laundry that kind of exists next to that. So we can look at these two firms here. So they decide, the steel mill decide how much steel they produce, and the laundry this is their output here. If there is no externalities, that's going to be the production possibility frontier. If you look at the dashed line here, so this is kind of when we have maximum laundry output and maximum steel production. If we have some externality in the sense that the emission or the pollution that comes out, I use it interchangeably for now, we're going to change that later on in the course. The pollution that come out of the steel mill affect the production, right, of the laundry, then it's going to look slightly different. It's going to look, let's say, this is a modest externality. You can look at different kind of level of externalities, I guess, or severity of externalities. But you can see that as steel mill production or output increased quite a bit, also the potential for output from the laundry, it diminished quite a bit, okay? Again, because they affect their production. So this is kind of the main point about this externality. There are two entities here. The decision by one entity, steel mill, affect the production, okay, of the laundry, okay? And the laundry, as it is right now, before any intervention, they have nothing to do. So it's basically, it's given to them. All right, this is the point about externality. So formally, we can think about it in the following way. So this is the steel, and they have the production function. For them, it depends on some Z, some different inputs of production. I don't know what steel mill, what you need there in the production, but some stuff. E is the emission from the steel mill, and that depends on, again, function of emission, depends again on the input of production. And you can think about the production function from the laundry, and this is kind of the main point of the externality, how we put it kind of more mathematically. So it depends on other input of production. It's going to be x1 to xn plus E, which is determined by actually the steel mill, not by the laundry. E is the environmental quality or the emission, okay? So it goes directly into the production function of the laundry, and this is determined by the steel mill. That's the point of the externality. This is basically the definition that I mentioned here before. Okay? So the choice of one firm, right? Enter the utility or production function, in this case the production function of another entity. So the choice of the steel mill, enter the production function of the laundry. Okay? So that's the main issue here. Okay? At a very basic level, the steel mill not going to take into account the damage that they create to the environment and therefore to the laundry output. Okay, so you can see here, let's take the case when we have modest production. You can see the laundry output and the steel mill output. Here is that we have maximal steel production. This is when we have maximum laundry production. And you can see with this dashed line here, this is just basically the total value of production in society. So it's just the price of steel times the quantity of steel plus the price of laundry times the quantity of laundry. And you can see that if we are in this allocation here, essentially what happened here in this case is that the steel mill doesn't take into account the damage that they create. But one thing that we can do, and we're going to use this trick in 5 minutes from now, when we talk about some other stuff, we can internalize this externality, right? How we can do that? We can say, okay, you know what? From now on, these two firms are merged. They are one firm. So when we do that, we already going to internalize the externality. Therefore, in our decision making, as how much steel we want to produce, we're also going to take into account the cost that has been created to the laundry, right? So if we do that, what we're going to try to maximize now is something slightly different, and then we're probably going to move from this allocation here to this allocation here, S1 and L1, because then Y going to be higher. Okay, we're just going to get more. Let's say, call it, well, it's revenue. It's total revenue what we have here. We don't have cost here, but that's what it is. But you can think about profit, right? We're going to try to maximize our profit. But now we do that and take the externality into account. Before that, if we just the steel mill, we don't take into account, this is absolutely what we should do. We should be here, right? Because we don't have to, going back to the point. And if we're just trying to maximize our profit, why would we? I mean, we might care about the environment, we might not, but if we would just want to maximize the profit, which it might, in many cases, that's what firms want to do. Well, maximize shareholder value, that's kind of what they're trying to do. Then we're going to end up here, all right? That's the point, okay? We're going to try to think about how we move from here to here, in a way, because this is why as a society, this is probably what we want. And how we move from here to here in the cheapest way possible, okay? Because once we move from here to here, if you think about externality, we internalize the externality, we got rid of the problem. Okay, but how are we going to do that? This is what kind of, what we're going to have to do. So basically, the concept of externality is closely linked to the concept of public goods and bads. As I mentioned before, I prefer the public goods and bads, but it's easier to talk to people about externality, so I completely agree with that point. We're going to use that a lot. By the way, externality doesn't have to be negative, right? It can be also positive as well. Think about you guys learning right now, consuming knowledge. You might going to give some of this knowledge to other people as well. So this is kind of a positive externality as well. But what we're going to deal with, it's mainly going to be negative externality. Right, just before we move to some ideas on kind of our first steps and what we can do in order to solve that, just want to give you an example and kind of make the point of externality a bit more concrete here. So this is an example about air pollution. What do we have here? We have quantity of emission and marginal cost and marginal benefit. This is the marginal private benefit here. It's downward sloping because it's just decline as emission rise because of diminishing return to pollution. And what we have here, I distinguish between two different things, between the marginal private cost and the marginal social cost. Okay, the marginal private cost is the actual cost for, let's say, the steel mill in the private costs that they actually occur when they produce, let's say, more steel. And the marginal social cost is a cost for society as a whole. So the difference between these two lines is what we call the marginal damage, is the externality. Okay, in the case that I showed you before, with a very, very simple case of just two firms rather, right? So it's just the effect of the steel mill production on the laundry. But you can think about it in general. If you have any kind of company that produce something and then also produce air pollution, if they're not being regulated, the difference between MSC and MPC, that's basically the marginal damage. The point is that, and this is kind of the fundamental why I do what I do, is that if we just give it to market, basically firms should and will operate here when MPC is equal to MPB, right? But us as society, we want to be here. So this is the E-private. This is kind of, when we have market failure. This is how much pollution we actually going to have in the atmosphere, okay? But this is too much because we have an externality. We haven't internalized it. Once we internalize the externality, think about it, I'll just show you, like we merge everything together. Now the company care about the damage as well. And we can do it in different ways. One is merging, other thing is, for example, taxing, put a tax on, or we can do some other stuff. Once you internalize that, you're gonna reach what we call E-efficient. So this is going to be the desired level of pollution. Okay? Which in this case in here, as you can see quite clearly, because it's a negative externality, it's going to be lower than E-private. So it means that if we just let markets be markets, don't intervene, we're going to have excessive level of air pollution. Right? We're going to be here rather than here. This is where we're aiming for. So again, I keep saying that again and again, in the next few weeks, what we're going to try to do is to move from here to here in the least cost way. That's essentially what we're going to do. All right? And the reason why we end here and not here is basically what I've been talking about for the last hour and 20 minutes. Okay? All these kind of unique properties that we have. All right, so how we can do that? Okay, so you know, we already saw why markets might not going to be desirable when conditions are not right, and why market can fail here. Now now I'm meaning right now, but also in the next few weeks, we're going to try to think about ways to solve that, to correct the market failure. And I guess that one can argue that there are three main ways to deal with that. One is property right-based approach, which is what we're going to do today. We said last week that one of the biggest issues that we have is that we don't have well-defined property rights. So maybe if we can just allocate property rights, right, that's going to solve the whole issue, right? The point is that we don't have well-defined property rights over the air, over the atmosphere. So if we can just do that, maybe that's going to solve the issue. And then if we think that's going to be the case, who we should give the property right to? The polluter or the victim? Okay? The other option, we're going to talk very little about that because I don't like this option very much. Maybe we're going to talk about it for 7 minutes, not today. Is directive-based approach, command and control regulation, which surprisingly or not, we're going to talk about that a bit more. That's kind of the most common form of environmental regulation. So basically, do that, don't do that. I hate that. I'm going to tell you why. Okay? Sometimes it makes sense, but most of the time it doesn't. All right? And we're going to spend a lot of time of kind of market-based instruments, economic incentive, basically give more choices to firms so that it can find the best way to reduce pollution in the case of pollution. All right? So we're going to tell them, look, for example, next week, look, you can do whatever you want, really, whatever you want, but you're going to have to pay us, let's say, a certain amount of tax for each unit that you emit. And I'm going to show you how doing that is a fantastic idea. Okay? At least in theory, and apparently in terms of political consideration, it might not going to be the best option. And we're going to talk about that as well. But today we're going to stick with the first one. Okay? Just let's start with something super easy. Okay? So let's do that. So that's going to be the beginning of our examination of how we correct market failure. This is what we're here for. Again, as a reminder, there are some strong assumptions underlying the efficiency of markets, and one of them is well-defined property rights, and we're going to examine it right now. And as I mentioned before, there is a question, if you provide a property rights, who should get the property rights, whether it should be the polluter or the victim. Many people tend to think that, what do you guys think? I don't know. Forget about the next. What do you think, the polluter or the victim? Yeah. Okay. So you think the victim? Yeah, go ahead. So why do they? Okay, that's an interesting one. So why do you think that they internalize the? So they will internalize the externality, but currently they are not, right?
Yeah, currently no, because there is it's like a tragedy of commons, like it's no one's land. So
Yeah.
if they own the property rights of
I'm not saying. I think it's an interesting point because like normally when we think about it, we don't think about their, you know, the damage being created to the, let's say the factory from the pollution. There is evidence in the American literature, including my own, that show how it reduced labor productivity. So maybe there is a case here that you know the firm want to reduce emission for their own sake. But I think that's a slightly different issue because if they want to do that, they should have done it anyway. So regardless, independent of assigning a property rights. Yes, then yes.
Is this not a false dichotomy if we use some into the world where like throwing out like nature rights, like the legal rights of like natural entities?
Mhm.
So there's like a better option of like just giving like just nature to giving human beings like the natural and legal rights.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna go back to that's a great point. Yes.
Isn't if you can buy and sell property rights, isn't it mathematically very equal?
So yeah, we're gonna do that. I think that we're gonna do that. Any other comment before I kind of go back to your point and your point? Yes.
Is it like important that just property just belongs to someone rather than you it belongs to?
Yeah, which is I think your point as well. So yes, and what I'm going to show you today, I'm going to bring it back, is that according to the court theorem, I'll tell you more about it in just a second. Yes, it doesn't really matter who you give the property right in terms of efficiency. It's going to matter for other stuff a lot. We're going to talk about it today a bit, and we're also going to show that mathematically in the problem set, right? To your point, I think it's a great point. I think that, you know, the initial reaction, I think, you know, when I don't know, like a while ago, I'm not going to reveal my age, when, you know, someone would have asked me, of course, you know, the victim, right? I mean, poor guys, and we all suffer or whatever. But you can think about examples, I mean, that it's going to be completely opposite. So let's say that, you know, and this is like real examples, right? I think there was some case in Santa Maria in California or something. Basically, there was a factory that was operating there. No one lived around that. Right? And let's say, and you can actually estimate, we're going to do it in week 11, you know, what's the decay function of pollution? You can see that, let's say, in this specific, not in this specific case, but in some cases, you know, you can't really detect pollution after 2 miles, let's say. So if no one lives around that, then you can argue, well, there is no issue, right? Forget about CO2, we're talking about just local air pollution, right? And then we say, okay, the victim has the right. So what about if I just gonna, you know, go near there and say, like, oh, I want to live here, you need to compensate me. But they've been operating there for 50 years. So I think that your point is a fair point. I totally agree with you as well. I agree with everyone here. But it's sometimes it's kind of the way that I framed that a bit. It's not a clear cut. So some cases, you know, you might want to do that. Some cases you want to do that. But the point that you both made is that according to the theorem here, at least from efficiency perspective, it doesn't really matter who you're going to give the property right. The most important thing is just to give the property right to one entity and or multiple, and that's going to solve the issue. Yeah.
And if it's possible, there's not like the property right can always be just auction and the revenue from the auction be used by public, public, right?
Well, we're going to talk about this. You have something slightly different in mind. We're just going to we're not even go to all of that. We're going to talk about this stuff. But my point is just to allocate property rights to an entity, and then the question is who we need to allocate it to. But yeah, if you think about another alternative option to deal with that, yes, and we're going to look at that. But this is kind of just this example. Yeah.
Question: before we said that one possibility is also the two firms to still let the longer firm to fuse.
To what? Sorry. To merge.
To merge.
Yeah.
Would that work here as well? That's something like joint property rights.
Yeah, I mean, if you merge a company, that's going to solve that. But yeah.
But I mean, from
But then you think about it. So what do you mean in the case of what we have in here? Because you have a firm, and then we have the consumer or the people. So how are you going to merge them together exactly?
that's exactly my question. Is that something that?
Oh, yeah. I can't think about a way. I mean, I guess you're going to give them some shares in the. I don't know. But then you come. Yeah, but then you need to think about how to do it. It's not exactly the same thing. anyway, let me kind of go through the point and what's going on here. The main point that I'm trying to say is that, at least, according to the theorem, at least under some condition, and this is an important point to make, under some condition, efficiency is unaffected by who hold the property rights. Okay. Again, distribution is going to be greatly affected, and we're going to see it in the problem set mathematically as well. Just because we are the LSE, I just want to mention that Ronald Coase, which is the person that came with this theorem, is an LSE alumni. So he did his undergraduate here, and also he was a lecturer. He won the Nobel Prize in 1991. And if you go to the econ department, one of the lecture theater is named after him. So it's kind of nice to learn about the Coase theorem while you are at LSE. And also he was a student like you and a lecturer like me. And he won the Nobel Prize, so who knows? More for you than me, okay? Let's kind of look at that in slightly more. Let's do it mathematically. I'm going to do exactly that, okay? So let's do that. So let's consider an example. If something is unclear after that, ask me, okay? Let's consider the following example. So we have a steel mill that produces steel. An emission at some cost, CS, which depends on the steel production, right? Depends on S. The laundry produces L at a cost C, L, which depends on both, as we mentioned before. It depends on the laundry output, so how much clothes they wash, I guess. And, but also, as I mentioned, because there is this negative externality here, it also depends on the production of steel, right? This is why S going into the cost function here. Prices are PS and PL, so the price of steel is given by PS, the price of laundry is given by PL. What is the efficient level of steel production? So going back to what I said before, we want the efficient level, right? We want a benchmark first, before we even think about allocation of anything. So as I said before, we're just going to merge these two firms together, essentially internalize the externality and solve that mathematically. Let me show you how I do that. So this is the profit function. Let me just remind you what it is. The profit function of M. M is the merged firm, right? The steel mill and the laundry together. So they produce steel and laundry. And what do we have here? We have the total revenue. So it's PS, the price of steel, times the quantity of steel, plus the price of laundry times the quantity, minus the total cost, right? Which is the cost for the steel mill and the cost for the laundry, right? So if we have this profit function, how do we solve that? Again, it's a merged firm now, so everything is internalized, right? So we're just going to differentiate that. We differentiate with respect to steel production. What we're going to get, we just differentiate that guy in here. So we're going to get this thing in here, right? So PS, this is just the marginal cost in respect, the marginal cost of steel, right? So that's coming from differentiation, this guy in here. And notice that we also have this guy in here, right? Because we also have S here in the cost function of the laundry, right? So we're going to get this expression here, set it equal to 0, and we can rearrange that, right? Move PS, rather leave PS here, move all of that to the other side, and you get this expression here. What is that? We get the marginal cost, which is this guy in here, plus the marginal social cost, right? This is the externality that we mentioned before, right? This is what we get, all right? So now, the price should not be equal just the marginal cost, right? As we normally do, P equal MC. It needs to be P equal MC, right? Plus the marginal external cost, plus this guy in here, which is basically the marginal social cost. What I showed you before with the pollution diagram. Let me just go back to that. Here. Okay, it's not this, it's this. Basically what I'm doing here. All right, so this is the conditions, right? This is what we want. We're maximizing profit here. That's what we're trying to do. We are the merged firm. We're trying to maximize. We're just trying to determine what is the efficient level. We're just trying to find out what is this guy here, essentially, in different contexts, right? This is about air pollution. The other one is about production of steel, but it's the same point. Okay, and then we differentiate the profit function with respect to L. We get this kind of normal equation, PL equal So we assume here that it's profitable to operate both the steel mill and laundry, but it doesn't have to be. We can think about a situation in which we can shut down one of these entities as well, but let's ignore that for now. And this is what we're going to get, right? So basically, this is the demand for steel, and basically what we would do if we would not internalize the cost, the externality, we will operate here, as 0, we're going to have an excessive level of steel output. But actually, where we want to operate here at S star, right? This is basically going to be the marginal social cost, going to be equal to that. Okay, so this is what we got. Now what we're going to do, because I just told you before that the cost theorem say it doesn't really matter who you give the property right to, we're going to get an efficient allocation, so let's test that, right? So first thing that I got is what is actually the efficient allocation, so remember this expression here, okay? That's not going to matter that much, so it's mainly this expression here, right? What we need to set P equal to. And let's kind of give the property rights first to the laundry and then to the steel mill and see if we get the efficient allocation. Okay, that's what we're going to try to do here. And let me show you how it works, because I think that's going to answer your question here, okay? So given any level of steel production S, we can solve for laundry. L, the optimal level of production by the laundry. So we're going to maximize profit for the laundry, right? Now, they have the property right, okay? So their profit function going to look like that for now, okay? So PL, so the price of laundry time L minus their cost, right? The cost, though, depends on steel mill, okay? We can take the first order condition, we get this expression here, but we can also think about, you know, if the steel mill want to produce anything for any level of S, they're going to have to compensate the laundry, right? So basically, the laundry have the property right. They can decide whether they want to let the steel mill to produce S or no, and how much actually as well. So they're going to try to extract as much out of it as they can, as long as it makes sense for them. So let me kind of show you in the next slide how their the new profit function, so to speak, going to look like. Okay. So if the steel mill produce S, it must compensate the laundry for its resulting reduction in profit, right? Because now the laundry have the property right. So let's rewrite this kind of profit function in the following way. Again, let's do it from the steel mill. It's actually going to be slightly easier. So this is the steel mill, right? So they think about their profit. What's going to be their profit function is going to be the total revenue, right? PS times S minus their cost, minus how much, right, they're going to have to pay the laundry, okay? Moving from no steel production to some steel production. And that will be determined by the loss that they will inflict on the laundry. Right? This is basically the profit of the laundry under no steel production compared to the profit of the laundry with some level of steel production. So we're going to try to solve that from a steel mill perspective. Okay? Yeah, we can ignore that. So we can just do that. So we can solve this guy here. So we're going to solve it for here. We're just going to differentiate that with respect to S and set it equal to 0. This is how we solve these things, as you know. There is a bit of math involved here. It's like you can read it in the book. It's worth spending a few minutes to kind of make sure that you go from one point to the other, just to kind of because there are a lot of letters here and less numbers. Maybe in the undergrad you did more numbers, like 2x to the power of 2, and then you differentiate 4x. Here it's uglier, but it's kind of the same concept. All right. It's also have economics meaning here, which we're going to do on Wednesday. This is, by the way, why I'm teaching you the seminars. It's all going to be very connected, okay? Even though if you come tonight and kind of look at the problem set, you're going to see like how is that related to what we did today? But it is, trust me, okay? I'm going to show you that on Wednesday. Anyway, the point is that if you do that, if you differentiate, you get this kind of ugly expression, but then when you kind of start doing a bit more, you get exactly the same expression that we had before, right? PS equal to the marginal cost plus the external cost. So basically what I just showed you, I mean, this is exactly what I showed you here, right? When we merge the firm, this is kind of our benchmark. And I just showed you that if you assign property rights for the laundry, we get exactly the same thing, okay? So we get the efficient level of production. Exactly what we want, okay? Now we're going to do the opposite, okay? Now we're going to assume that the steel mill has the property right over clean air, okay? So how is that going to look like? I'm already telling you, this is related to question 3 in the problem set, okay? What are we doing now? Just going to be more numerical in question 3. Okay, so now assume that the steel mill has the property right. So in the absence of any side payment, the steel mill would choose S such that the price equal to the marginal cost, right? So they're going to basically produce as much steel as they can. If we're going to go back in time and going back to this point in here, they're going to be here. Okay, as much as they can. They don't care about the damages at the moment. Okay? But because they have the property right, maybe they should care about, because not because they care, it's because they can extract some money out of it. All right? So the loss to the laundry relatively to NES is given by the following function here, right? The following expression here, rather. Sorry, this is the profit function for the laundry when the steel mill produce some level of S, compared to the profit that they get if they produce the maximum amount. Okay? And the point here is that the laundry is willing to pay up to this amount, right, to have the steel mill reduce production to some level S. This is going to be the maximum willingness to pay of the laundry to the steel mill. Now, don't forget, the steel mill has the property right. So they will try to extract as much as they can out of the laundry. So this is why this expression is so important here. They're trying to think from, putting them, the steel mill trying to think about the profit function of the laundry, not because they care about the laundry, because they're trying to think about, okay, how much money we can get out of it, and try to solve that in this way. Okay? Because they know this is how much they're going to be willing to pay. Okay? And now what we can do, we can include this compensation term in the steel profit maximization problem. So the same as we did before in a way, okay, by just going to enter the profit function in a slightly different way. Because before, if you remember, when we solved it from the steel mill perspective, it was with a negative, remember, with a minus sign. Why? Because the steel mill had to pay compensation for the laundry. Now it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be with a plus sign, because that's money that they can get, because they own the property right. But let's see how it works. So that's exactly what I just said. So they're going to maximize their profit, right? So it depends on the total revenue, PS times S, right, minus their costs, plus what I just showed you before, the maximum willingness to pay of the other firm, okay? So the term in brackets here is just the difference in profit between S, which is kind of basically what they're trying to figure out. What's the right level of S for them, right? What's the right level of steel production for them? They're going to maximize their own profit. Okay? And as 0, this is kind of the market outcome. So if they don't care about anything, they don't do anything. Okay? If they don't have property right. No one has property right. That's the point, actually. It's better explained like that. Okay? So how is that going to look like? Yeah, I mean, just show you how it looks like. But we can make some math stuff and make it, it is pretty ugly, I'm not going to lie. But the point here is that the problem become identical to the previous case, and what we get, we're going to get exactly the same level of production of steel as we had before. And basically what I just showed you, that it doesn't matter who you give the property rights, in terms of the final outcome of S and L, we're going to get exactly the same thing. Because the core of the issue, even though you thought it's kind of like too simple, is this fact that we don't have well-defined property rights. So once we can solve that, potentially, that's going to solve the problem. Okay? Now, does that mean that it doesn't matter at all? No, of course it matters, right? Look at just what I just showed you before. Look at the profit function, right? So the profit function of the steel mill here, when they have the property right, as I mentioned before, this expression here, or some expression here, come with a positive sign. So it's contribute to the profit. They get more money. Before it was at a minus, so they gain less money. So of course they want the property right. Okay? And again, question 3 in the problem set, I'm going to basically show you that as well. Okay? So, and people will, and firms and entities will, fight quite hard for that. All right? So this is kind of something that it's worth remembering. But anyway, some efficient level of steel will be produced. So the fundamental cost result is that the initial assignment of rights vis-a-vis pollution does not matter for efficiency. However, distribution differs substantially. That's what I mean, distribution. Who gets what, that have a big impact, and people care about it a lot, okay? And basically, the next bullet point is exactly what I said. So let's kind of go through, this is really important slide, actually. All right? So about the cost theorem, and what does it actually says. So assume a world in which some producer or consumer are subject to externalities generated by other producer or consumer. Further assume the following. Look at that. Perfect information. Consumer or producer or price taker. Okay. Costless core system for enforcing agreement, producer maximizes profit and consumer maximizes utility. Kind of agree with that. No income or wealth effect. And one of the biggest things, and we're going to talk more about it again in the seminar because it's part of the problem set, no transaction cost. Okay, which is a big thing to remember, okay? Because in most real life settings, transaction cost is a big deal. It's really, it's a massive deal, okay? But this is also, so you think about, you might think now, okay, yeah, it's another one of these theories that, you know, we can't really use in real life, but maybe, and there are lots of readings in this week, readings to talk about that. What do we actually get out of the cost theorem? But at the minimum, and I really strongly encourage you to read the readings, at least some of them, because it's really fascinating. Because this debate around the cost theorem is still ongoing. I think some of the readings that I updated is like from 2021 and 2022 or something, so it's not that long ago, and this is like from the 1960s, right? But at the very minimum, it highlights some important aspects of public policy that we need to consider. For example, transaction costs. And we're going to come back to that when we talk about cap and trade, for example. All right, so this is kind of, even if it's, we can't always use that, or, it's not perfect, but at least it highlights some important features that we need to be aware of, okay? Yes?
Could we just say transaction costs are significant, and therefore in the applied context it would make more sense to give it the ones that will actually need the property rights in the end to be closer to the efficient outcome to minimize transaction costs, and therefore probably give it to the producers?
So you think this is kind of, it's a good point. So you're saying that, okay, if we care about that, again, it's not going to be perfect, but we might as well give it to this kind of one criteria that we can use, that the one that reduced transaction costs quite a bit. So I don't disagree with that, but you mentioned the second point is that it's probably to producer, which I'm not sure about that. I think it's a good point actually, with something that I haven't thought before. Okay, thank you for that. So this is kind of the main point that I try to say. And again, big debate whether how applicable it is, and whether it works. Again, do the readings, and we can talk more about it during the seminar as well. I also want to say that even Kos himself wasn't super, confident that that's kind of, what's going to solve lots of the issues. But I think it's definitely worth studying and kind of thinking about all this stuff, at least when we take our first step. And I think that from next week, we're going to take something, actions or think about intervention that are definitely more practical and things that are being used quite a lot. Okay, so we're going to do taxation, then we're going to do cap and trade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but I think it's worth starting with something relatively straightforward. Last two or three slides is just kind of, in terms of bargaining, kind of related to the point. I guess that somewhat to the point that you kind of raised. How does it actually work, these things in reality, right? So, and I guess it's also related to transaction costs in some way. So let's consider a power plant and lots of people living near to the plant to suffer from pollution. Let's say the people own the right. how does it actually work, right? Can we have an agreement among the residents on what's the right amount? Is that even likely? The plant has to determine the willingness to pay, and people have to an incentive to lie, right? Because if if people own the right, I have an incentive to say, oh, I care very much, my willingness to pay is massive, right? Something like that, or willingness to accept rather is quite big, right? So, and again, the source of the problem here is going back to the beginning of this lecture is non-rivalness, okay? So, which obviously leads to free riding, which will be also discussed today. And then, if the power plant on the right, people have to get together to pay the plant, right? And then, we can think about the situation, again, about free riding. People have an incentive. They need to decide on how they actually pay the plant. The people have incentive to lie, again, right? To free ride on other people because I know that you're willing to pay more. So I was like, I don't really care. I want you to pay. So these kind of issues that around free riding combined with private information, something that, we assume here that there is full information. We actually in week, don't remember, 5 or 6, we're going to talk a lot about information and how much and how things change when we don't have perfect information. But these two things combined really have an impact on outcomes. Yes? If the people own the rights. So if people own the rights, and let's say that the firm need to, hold on. So let's go back to that. If the people own the right, they have an incentive to lie about the willingness to pay because or to accept from the firm, right? Because they say, look, so the firm needs to pay them now in order to reduce the emission. So if you ask me how much I need to pay you, I have an incentive to say, oh, it's actually quite high, even though it's not that high. Okay, so it's a slightly different issue. I agree with that. But yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, so that's kind of limit the applicability, I guess, of that. But again, fascinating debate about what it is. But at a minimum, we need to reduce transaction costs associated with trade. I'm going to talk a lot about transaction costs on Wednesday. Excuse me in advance. Another point, kind of big point: victims of pollution should be willing to pay to get rid of it. I think. I mentioned before the point about Santa Maria, sorry. Sometimes, yes, there is this moral ground sometimes that it just have to be with the victims, but sometimes maybe it's not going to be the case, and we can think about some instances like that. Still ongoing debate about this theorem, and as I mentioned before, Coase himself wasn't optimistic about the relevance of the theorem in solving environmental problems, but it's still worth considering it. I'll see you all on Wednesday. Please, please, please try to solve the problem and don't get deflated if you can't. All right? It's not that easy. Hi.
Can I ask something? Because just to determine how I read them, because it says in the exam there will be certain quantities, right?
Oh, it's only, yeah, so it's only on, so yeah, so I'm going to go through that, but basically, when we cover empirical paper, so if we cover the empirical paper in the lecture or in the seminar, you might going to get a question of this paper.
Okay.
In,
Because I want
yeah.
to see if I should summarize each thing or
No, so it's just the thing that we actually going to be on a lecture slide or we talk during the class. In terms of exam. Yeah, and also like the things about like there is a core and there is optional, so most of the debate about both theorems, in the optional section you don't have to do that. Even though I just find it interesting. I know you have other things. Okay, yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah, it's the emission, because, well, I mean, the emission is a byproduct of the sea production. So the cost for the Mike gonna be like the answer reading gonna be able to answer like the figures? And everyone's gonna be like,
If you go to the funnels,
what can we learn from it? So you can, the answer reading might be something.
I thought you found my little bag of
Also
cocaine.
that people like reading and being
Good? Not too bad, not too bad. A bit tired, but I'm alive, you know?
Well, I mean, how are you how it is?
Where are you going? To work?
No, I'm finished. I'm dating with the girls.
Well, like, is it kind of thing that like builds on top of each other? Or?
The class?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it's just an entity, you could call it a company or whatever, but it's the entity of, yeah, owns the place, like the property. Yeah. The answer is I don't know. It's just like, the way that I think about it is like being like super annoying economist, is like, okay, it's just like another way of because who leads, or is it like a state? Sue the person or the entity that buys the property rights of the river? But there is an entity. So anyway, the same thing. Yeah, so again, at the end of the day, you want to call it a firm, you want to call it an entity, you want to call it state or whatever, but the end of the day, someone's got the property rights. And that to me doesn't really matter exactly. Whether it's no, that's the point. Once you start property rights, you deal with it. That's exactly the point. You want to do that in order to take someone to court if they don't comply. That's exactly the point. Because let's say that the status quo actually that is no one has property rights. So the debt factor, actually the polluter has the property rights. That's what I from Wednesday. That's the situation. So we can. I was thinking of someone that knows. But anyway, the point is that if we don't assign property right, the fact that the polluter has the property right? Because they can just pollute. They don't, but this is kind of that is the status quo, right? So they just have it. So actually, if we want to give it to the victim, you're changing the status quo anyway. Does that make sense? So like before we intervene, I just said a steel mill produces as much as they want. So this is the equivalent of them having. It's not exactly the same thing, but they can do whatever they want. They can't charge the other, like what we did with they actually have the property right, they don't get the extra revenue. They can't charge the other. Potentially they can, but they don't. It's not going to be something binding. But yeah, but.
But isn't it? It's because like you have the issue where it's like people will over exaggerate what they. First off, like people might not be able to fully like comprehend, I guess, the utility they get from nature, and then also they might over exaggerate like what they need to be paid. But if you
Of
have
course.
like if you have nature, which is like a legal entity in its own right, and it knows like the cost of cleaning up, like let's say like certain pollution in a river is like a set cost that you can figure out. Doesn't that kind of get rid of some of the free rider issues?
Nature doesn't make decisions, doesn't have them.
But in certain
It's
countries,
still an entity. That's why. That's my point. So whether you want to call it a firm or an entity or whatever it is, it's still some entity, right? So
I guess, but it's like neither the like I guess it's like outside of that kind of binary between polluter and victim or something.
I guess you could say it's a victim
I suppose.
because the river. Let's say that it's actually the river, right? It's not, right? The river is the victim. It's not exactly that because it's the people that use the river, or maybe it depends on how you see that stuff, right? It's kind of more philosophical. Is it the river itself or is it the people that use the river? But I guess that